of guilt and shame
Mm.
for the people I'd hurt, the people I'd let down, the way I'd lived, the way I felt I'd let God down. I believe this stuff, but instead of getting better, I'm getting worse all the time. And I had done some incredibly despicable things to many people. And that was just removed. I just felt like someone put me in a human washing machine that washes your insides.
We're talking with Tim Scheuer, who's church partnership manager for an organisation called Hope Economy. He's got quite an incredible story of how he came to faith in Jesus Christ and the change that Jesus made in his life. Tim lives on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. And Tim, hello to you.
Hello, Ian. It's great to be hanging out with you this afternoon.
And I'm interested in Hope Economy. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, we've just recently changed our name from Christians Against Poverty, or CAP Australia, to Hope Economy. And the great vision of Hope Economy is that in Australia, no one should have to face their financial struggles alone. We know that with the changing economy, there's a lot of financial pressures on people, and a lot of people are facing those struggles alone.
And I'm presuming that what you're doing now is a reflection to some degree of what you've come to experience as important to you in your own journey with God.
Yeah, that's right. I think the support of journeying through this difficult life with brothers and sisters who love you without condition, who pray for you, who are there for you when you have questions and various needs and struggles.
Gotcha. Now, I'm hearing a hint of another accent there. Tell us where you grew up and the first 10, 15 years of your life. What did that look like?
Yeah,
What was going on in terms of your religious belief at that time as well?
I was born in Toledo, Ohio, which is a town on the Great Lakes. It's a part of the industrial Midwest. I was the youngest of six children, and my family were Roman Catholic. So my mother attended church. My father never attended church. And they sent us to a Roman Catholic grade school, they called it, which was year 1 through 8. And then I went to a all boys Catholic high school from year 9. And so I guess I would say that growing up in that Catholic environment, I learned a bit about God. I would say that I believed in God, although I didn't have very accurate information about God, but I wasn't following the way of Jesus. I didn't know God personally. And I think because my father, who never went to church, was a World War II veteran who came home from the war with serious injuries, both physically and psychologically. And of course, back then, PTSD wasn't a thing. They called it shell shock. So he had some issues that he dealt with as best as he could. But one of the byproducts was he was quite distant from me, the youngest child, and not very emotionally warm. So I think I was often rebelling as a young person to draw attention and to find out where there was some loving limits, particularly from my father. And he never really laid down those limits, which I understand he was dealing with some pretty heavy issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of my rebellious behavior, which was drinking, drugs, wrecking cars, chasing girls, that kind of behavior. And that's really why I got expelled from high school, because I was just quite out of control.
And so you were going to church in that time, you were going along to mass and that
No,
sort.
I only ever went to church because my mother asked me to. And sometimes when I went with my siblings and my mother wasn't going, which was often, we would just go pick up the bulletin and then go do something else
Mm.
and come home and give her the Sunday bulletin as proof that we were at church.
Ah. Do you
But
have
as part of school, we were in religious studies and services on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Do you have any recollection of any private moments where you were praying to God, asking God for things, maybe reading the Bible?
I do remember when I was about 15 years of age and I was doing some work with my uncle who lived in another town nearby, and he was pretty a pretty wild guy. And he lived in a duplex. I was staying there one weekend, and the couple down below were committed Christians. They invited us down for dinner one night. I remember I was 15 years old, and the man gave a very full-on testimony of his previously immoral lifestyle. And I was very immoral at that time. And I can remember that was the first time I clearly came under such deep conviction that the way I was living was sinful, wrong, and that I should be living differently if I really believed in God.
Right.
And I think that was the beginning of me realizing I really wasn't a Christian. I guess growing up, I just would have assumed I was a Christian, but I was beginning to learn that a Christian actually follows the way of Jesus and not just believes in God and goes to church. I thought you've got to change yourself to get good enough to be accepted by God. But my thinking was, okay, I got to get good enough. So things got so bad because I was dealing drugs and using harder drugs and traveling to sell drugs, and got stranded in an area I wasn't familiar with, sitting on a bunch of drugs that I had on a front. I got shot at speeding away from a bar where we were trying to make a deal in a car. My vehicle, which was my pickup truck for my business, got stolen, and I had to wire home for money. I had gotten in trouble and was supposed to be in court for a hit and run DUI and missed the court date. And so I ended up spending a few days in jail, and I had a guy who was promising that if I didn't have this money for these drugs on a front by a certain date, my life wasn't worth living, which I took as you're going to die. And so that's what drove me to join the U.S. Army on a whim, because I had to get out. I had to get out of town. I had considered joining the Navy with one of my crazy cousins prior to this, when we were in trouble about another thing. And so this was the thing that forced me to take some action. Anything to do with God. It was just, okay, I've got to try the geographical change. And so I joined the U.S. Army to get out of town.
Literally a get out of jail free card. Join the Army.
Yes.
Yeah. So you haven't run into those guys again? They're not still chasing you, are they?
After I became a Christian, I did make amends with a lot of the people that I had ripped off and made bad deals with, and businesses I had ripped off. And that's a whole nother session, I think, another story in itself. It took me a number of months and traveling various places. So most of the people that I could track down actually went back and said, I was the guy that did these things.
Right.
Which opened up incredible opportunities to share what had happened. And Jenny, my wife, was with me in many of those, in a few smoky drug dens, talking to scary people and telling them I was the guy.
Oh, golly.
And it actually was quite amazing, because overwhelmingly I had a really open, positive reception, just being sincere about how I had been living and what God had done in my life, which I haven't told you yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, we are getting there. And it must have been a massive life change to motivate you to that degree that you would want to go back into the lion's den and make amends for the sins that you had committed. Tell me about what happened in the Army.
When I arrived at basic training, everything changed on the outside. My hippie hair got cut off. My clothes changed from normal clothes to olive drab. Where I lived changed. What I ate changed. Who I was with changed. My routine changed. Everything changed that you could change externally. And initially, I thrived in that very highly disciplined environment because I couldn't get into any trouble. There was no alcohol. There was no drugs. But as soon as I finished basic training, in fact, the very first weekend we had off and we went into town, it was a wild event, and I ended up in jail. And I'd actually been accepted into a program you had to be invited into. And when I came back after being in jail that weekend, boasting to my colleagues about this wild weekend, the colonel that was in charge of the program overheard some of my boastful conversation and sent me packing to Fort Carson, Colorado. Yeah, so I disqualified myself from that first opportunity and ended up in Fort Carson, Colorado in the 2nd Infantry Division.
Yeah.
And that's when I continued, well, took up really drinking and drugging as a soldier and selling drugs as a soldier.
So everything had
And
changed on the outside,
yeah, and nothing on the inside.
nothing on
You
the
know, what you
inside.
find out is in the Army, you find the same kind of people, but they just have short hair and green clothes.
Mm.
But if you're living that kind of lifestyle, it's like a magnet. You attract other people who are living that kind of lifestyle. And there's, at that time, in the, there was, I joined in 1980. There was a lot of guys that were in there who stood before a judge and said, okay, you go to jail or you join the Army. Now, I don't think they do that anymore, but I was in an era where there was a lot of misfits. They were in the Army because the option was going to jail. As soon as there was freedom and money,
Yeah.
and in a military town, there's a lot of mischief to get up to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love doing that stuff. I was like, to me, that was, I'm the sex, drugs, and rock and roll guy. And then I got in trouble in the military. I got an Article 15 for insubordination, which is a very serious charge, and I was sentenced to 30 days in the intensive training unit, which was part of the military prison. It was 30 days of deprivation of privacy, speech, sleep, and just actual abuse,
Wow.
which is a whole nother podcast. And I'm sure they couldn't do that today, but it was just what I needed to realize that there was a higher authority on the planet than me, who up to that stage got away with stuff all the time. And I think God really used it to get my attention. And I was really frightened that I was an addict and an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought I was unlucky up till then. But all my troubles always were connected with drug and alcohol abuse, blackouts,
Mm.
accidents, all sorts of things like this,
Mm-hmm.
short times in jail. And so I made a fresh effort to stop drinking and drugging. And it was at that time that my friend said, hey, next time you need a haircut, this sounds like a bizarre story. They said, go down to the beauty college in downtown Colorado Springs because there's young girls that are learning to cut hair. They're really good looking, and it's only $2 for a haircut. So I said, I'm in. So I go down, and this young girl, whose name was Gigi, she was cutting my hair, really attractive young girl. But before I know it, she's sharing her story of having grown up in an alcoholic and an abusive home, taken from her abusive parents and sent to a foster home where her foster parents were Christian. And she told me she had become a follower of Jesus. And then she told me how much change and healing, those are the two words she used, that Jesus had brought in her life. And I started sharing, hey, I've been in a lot of trouble and I believe in God, I believe in Jesus. And then she says, then she like looked a bit confused. She said, well, then why don't you follow Jesus? And like really put a challenge to me. And I could never remember actually anyone ever challenged me to do something with my belief. And my old excuse in my own mind was, hey, I'm the sex, drugs, and rock and roll guy. And I had just begun to realize sex, drugs, and rock and roll got me in jail, got me in the Army, got me in the intensive training unit for 30 days. It's not doing me any favors. I've made this fresh effort to quit. And so that old excuse had sort of been removed. And I really didn't have any good reason to tell her why I shouldn't follow Jesus.
Mm.
And so, because she was speaking words of life, and because she was quite good looking, very mixed motives, I talked her into a lunch 2 days later at the cafe across from the beauty college, showed up. She got off her lunch break. We walked across the road, sat around a table, and there she led me to Christ.
What did that look like? What leading someone
Well,
to Christ?
the passage that really stood out, that made the big difference, was Romans 5:8, which says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Mm.
And I guess from my Catholic background, thinking, boy, if I could only just stop sinning. And what dawned on me at that lunch with her, and she helped explain this, was that no, it was while we were still sinners that Christ died for us. And so I do remember her leading me in a prayer, and I remember shaking and being intensely reticent about making this commitment, but being very convicted about needing to make it because I had no concept of the character of God being a loving father and a good shepherd. I thought, if I fully surrendered my life to God, he would just send me to deepest, darkest Africa and forget about me. Like I really didn't have a good idea what it meant to follow
Mm.
Jesus. And I had no concept that God had a good plan and purpose for my life. I just thought, man, I'm letting go. Who knows where we're going, but I'm not sure how I'm going to like it. But nonetheless, I committed my life to Christ in a very sincere prayer, confessing my sin, asking Jesus to forgive me, confessing that I believe that he came, lived, died on a cross, was buried, and 3 days later rose again so I could be forgiven, and ask him to come into my life to help me to be a different person.
Right. And did you walk out of that coffee shop feeling like a different person? Was there a notable change in your life first couple
Felt
of weeks?
I felt fabulous, but the biggest thing that happened was in the morning when I woke up, I just felt clean. And I had been carrying such a burden of guilt and shame for the people I'd hurt, the people I'd let down, the way I lived, the way I felt I'd let God down. I believe this stuff, but instead of getting better, I'm getting worse all the time. And I had done some incredibly despicable things to many people. And that was just removed. I just felt like someone put me in a human washing machine that washes your insides. And it was such a contrast to the external change that I'd experienced when I joined the Army. This was an internal change that I didn't do. I didn't do anything about it. I just went to sleep having committed my life to Christ and woke up feeling like I was new.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sense of being forgiven, I think, is the most profound experience I've ever experienced in my life.
Have you got a memory of what took place in the next 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months that helped you to grow as a baby follower of Jesus?
For the 5 weeks following that, I went to church with her and her adopted parents. And I don't remember a whole lot from it, but I started reading my Bible. And then that was October 1981. And in January, I got out of the U.S. Army, was aiming to go to Israel to see where Jesus walked, because I had access to U.S. military flights for a little over a month. Long story, won't have to go into it. But instead of getting to the East Coast to get to Europe, to get to the Middle East, I got to the West Coast, got to Hawaii. And when I found out in Hawaii that there was a flight twice a week that came to Australia, I signed up for that flight and arrived into Richmond Air Force Base on Australia Day 1982.
En route to Israel?
No, couldn't get a flight going that way. So instead of just wasting my month,
Got you.
I thought I'll go somewhere. I went to Hawaii, where I had friends I grew up with were living in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But when I got there, I found out there was a flight twice a week that came to Australia. I thought, Australia? I'd love to go to Australia.
Yeah.
That sounds very exotic.
Mhm.
And so I got a visa,
Yeah.
and I ended up arriving on Australia Day just because I could,
Yes.
for $5 for the lunch on the flight. It was
Wow.
on a military transport plane.
Okay.
The only place I knew of was a youth hostel in King's Cross. I had 150 US dollars, and at the time, the Australian dollar was stronger than the US dollar because it was before it was floated, and a backpack with a few bits of clothes in it. So I checked into this youth hostel, which was $4 a night, and got curious about what Australian beer would taste like. And after the first night going to the pub with a few of the young travelers, I was off to the races. I had so little knowledge about the Christian faith that I didn't know where I could find a Christian. I didn't realize I could just go into any church on a Sunday, find other Christians there, and find some support and help.
And
And then
the cross was a
yeah,
pretty seedy place to
the
be.
cross was
in the
pumping. Yeah, it was absolutely pumping, and not the right place for a brand new Christian without any connection with anybody.
Yeah.
Not recommended. And so I ended up becoming the warden of the youth hostel, which was like king of Party Central. And it was quite a debauched setup. And the first weekend I had off, I had bought a little car, and I decided I'd travel up to the Blue Mountains. And I got into Katoomba on Saturday afternoon, and I saw a sign for a Christian coffee house Saturday night with live music and free food, and I think it said fellowship or something. And it was the first opportunity that I saw to connect with some other Christians. And because I was feeling really bad about having been forgiven,
Yeah.
which was so real, and now I'm feeling all the shame and guilt. In fact, I was gaining quite a bit of weight because just eating to deal with my guilty conscience, all this great Australian food. So I became, like, in a very short time, quite plump.
Yep.
Just to try to manage this guilt of my life, like
Yeah.
comfort food. And so I went into this Christian coffee house, and one of the young men befriended me. It was raining that night, and I just had one of our foam mattresses, and I was sleeping under the stars, one of the foam mattresses from the youth hostel in the back of my car.
Mm.
So he said, "Where are you sleeping?" I said, "Well, last night I slept at Wentworth Falls Lake." He said, "Well, why don't you come over to my house?" It's a Christian conference center that his parents ran and lived in the house that was on the site. And so crashed out late that night, woke up that morning and met Keith and Phyllis Browning and their three children, including their oldest daughter, Jenny,
Who you married?
who I married,
What a
who've been
story.
now married 44 years. Yeah.
Wow. And what was it about meeting Jenny's parents that helped establish you in your faith?
He had the greatest capacity to love people unconditionally of any person I've ever met in my life. And so that very first morning when I woke up, it was like he was welcoming me into the family with a big hug and just incredible interest and compassion in who I was and my story and welcome and an invitation to come and live up there, which I did. There was this amazing Christian community there,
Mm.
and I just became a part of it. And
Mhm.
just and Jenny's dad just started caring for me and feeding me books and praying for me and helped me understand the character of God and more about what the church is and what it means to follow Jesus. And God just started to work in my life in quite an incredible way.
And what prompted you to do that whole making amends, as you called it? What led
Yeah,
to that happening?
we had our first anniversary in New Zealand while doing a YWAM discipleship training school, which was a residential training school. So we went to YWAM New Zealand and did a school just because we wanted to grow in our faith. And during that time, there's some really good teaching about amends or making restitution, about not giving the devil a foothold in your life, that God's forgiven you, but you've harmed people. You need to make amends. You need to put things right as far as it depends on you. And so I felt really convicted and I started making a list. And I think I had 17 fairly major things on my list. I need to go back, look this person in the face, go back to my primary school that I broke into and stole stuff. I worked at a grocery store as a night stock person before I joined the Army, and I stole a lot of things. Went back and met with the manager. I stole a guitar from a band at a hotel at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, which is a flash ski resort. I went back there and said they looked at the police report. I said, I sold it to a friend in the Army. I bought it back from him. He thought I was crazy. I shared my testimony with him. He later became a Christian,
Mm.
bought the guitar back, and then went to the hotel, said, hey, a couple years ago I was here. I was really intoxicated. After the band finished, I left late night. I walked to the toilet. I saw this guitar sitting. The band was having a drink at the bar. Their gear was in the room they were playing in. I saw this really nice Ovation guitar with a pickup in it. I picked it up and took off out the back. And I've become a Christian and I want to make amends. I want to give this back. I'd love to meet with the person. So they contacted the person because they had the police report. The guy said he didn't want to meet with me, but he'd love to have the guitar back. So I wrote my testimony out,
Yeah.
and so I had the guitar that I bought back from my friend, and I put some cash in there because the pickup was missing, and a letter, and gave it back. So
Yeah.
those are the kind of things I did. And then there was some druggies there that some were military, some were not military that I ripped off. I stole a gun from them. And so this was in Colorado Springs, and I went back there, and this whole group of people were there partying, and there was probably a dozen people, guys and girls. They were drinking, they were smoking pot, smoking hash. It, it was a drug den, and I had stolen some money, and I'd stolen this gun, and I went back with Jenny and stayed maybe an hour, 2 hours there, telling my story
Mm.
and making things right, giving them some cash value for what it was that I had stolen.
Mm.
I went to the grocery store and met with the manager and told him, "Hey, I worked here for a period of time. I used to take stuff home because we had a work bucket with our pricing gun and various gloves and things like this." And I said, I'd take home lobster tails, I'd take home alcohol because they sold alcohol and stuff. He said, "Well, how much do you think it was? What's the value?" And I said, "Well, probably at least $300." So remember, this is 1980,
Mm.
so that was a fair bit of money. And so he said, "Just hold on a second." because I'd share my testimony with him. He said, I'm going to go get the assistant manager. I'm a Christian. He's not. I've been trying to witness to him. I want you to tell him the same thing you've just told me. So he went and got the assistant manager. We sat in the office at the supermarket while it was open and all the cash registers are going, and I shared my testimony a second time. And then he said, we don't need the money. What I want you to do is just give the money to your favorite charity and send us proof you've done that. Yeah. And so that's what I did. I donated $300.
I know you've worked a lot with people on the margins, people outside of the life of the church, people who are in trouble, people who don't fit in. What's the motivation for that?
I feel that was me. I wasn't reached because I walked into a church. I was reached because a young girl had confidence in Christ enough to share her faith and lead me to Christ in her context where she was learning a trade. And I think that's a beautiful story for two ways, in that there's people out there that I would have, if you would have made a judgment about my gospel receptivity, you'd say, stay away from that guy. He is not open. He's debauched. He's dangerous. He's the drug guy. He's bad news. But in actual fact, I was desperately searching for God's forgiveness and God's love. So you can't judge receptivity by looking at a person's life, because you don't know what's going on inside. And I was never going to just rock up to a evangelical church service on a Sunday. Never. And so the second part of that story, I think, is that people need to be equipped to share their story and help someone else meet Jesus. And if a 15-year-old girl from an abusive alcoholic background can do it, then you can too. And when I went back to Colorado Springs, I tried to track her down, but I couldn't find her because I wanted to thank her and tell her, listen, the person you had the courage to lead to Christ and the ability to lead to Christ that you saw for 5 weeks and then he disappeared, God has used me. I'll meet her in eternity, and hopefully it'll be a great meeting. I'm sure it will be.
Well, this series is all about giving a platform for people to share their stories. And it's a belief of mine that the power of testimony can unlock so many things for people. People can identify with different aspects of a story. A story is undeniable because it's what happened to you. And to hear of how people's lives have been so radically changed, not, as you said, by an effort of them to make changes in their life, but in opening up their life to Jesus, the Spirit of God has come in and made those changes from the inside out.
And that's why I love the Christian faith and the Christian family, is by that definition, everyone can succeed. It's got nothing to do with your IQ, your looks, your socioeconomic status, where you live. None of that stuff matters. It's just about whoever you are, whoever it is, letting God take a hold of your life and pursuing his plan and purpose for your life, which is a good plan and purpose.
One of the aspects of your story that stood out to me, and perhaps there's other things that have stood out for other people, but those early weeks and months of deciding to follow Jesus, it's so important to be surrounded by positive-minded, Jesus-following people who can support you and help establish you in what you believe and in what you want your values to be going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tim, let me pray for you as we finish up.
Yeah, thank you, Ian.
Father, I thank you for this story of change. I thank you for the change of heart so many years ago, and for Gigi's boldness as a young hairdresser to share her faith, her story with Tim. Thank you for how you used that to bring a change in Tim's life. Thank you for Keith Browning and the influence he had in supporting Tim. And I thank you for that Tim's heart to reach out to those on the margins, those who are doing it tough, those who aren't thinking about turning up to church on Sunday. And I pray that you would continue to empower Tim to share your story, the story of Jesus coming to earth and rising again. Empower him, Lord, to share that with others. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Tim.
It's great chatting, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.